The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip Selection, as opposed to Election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee that they would never unite in rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the 3/5 clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote. That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The strip and flip selection of 2016.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And we've got political news, economic news, geeky science news, Afghanistan news. There's just a lot of stuff going on. Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for the second hour of the program, or at least a good chunk of it. But let me start out with, as it were, the political news of the day. We start out with the Democrats are planning, kind of following on what the Republicans did in 2014 to President Obama's State of the Union address. There were four Republicans who gave. Say what? Oh, sorry about that. There were four Republicans who gave rebuttals or responses or whatever you call it to the State of the Union address. And there's going to be 5 Democrats tonight responding, or 4 Democrats and 1 independent. Joe Kennedy, the congressman from Massachusetts, is giving the official response. Joseph Kennedy III. We'll see how that goes. Bernie Sanders is doing a response, which will be on various social media platforms, presumably like his town hall the other day, where it's on Facebook and Twitter and, all the usual suspects, and over at Cenk Uygur's Young Turks network and a few others. Elizabeth Guzman of Virginia will give the official Spanish language response. And then there's one, Maxine Waters will be doing one on BET. And former Representative Donna Edwards is going to be giving one for the Working Families Party, which is a progressive group. So that should be interesting. In response to the commercialization of the State of the Union address, this is pretty mind-boggling. I got this email this morning from Eric Trump. And if you're just tuning in, the backstory here is that 2 years ago when Trump started looking like a serious candidate, I sent him $5 so I'd get on the mailing list. And they're still mailing me stuff. Virtually every day I get a fundraising appeal from these guys. They are raising a lot of money. And I signed up as Fred Flintstone over at the Trump campaign. So this says, Fred, we're sick of hearing the media say that our movement is losing support. Today that ends. Today that ends was italic. You is all caps. You can prove them wrong while the world watches my father's first State of the Union address. The official Donald J. Trump for President live stream of the speech will display the names of all the patriots who choose to make a contribution for the world to see. Even if you choose to only give $1, the proof of your support will send shockwaves around the world as they see every American who proudly stands behind our president. As the president has said so many times before, it's not the size of your gift that matters, but the fact that you stepped up to have a stake in the future of our country. This is a moment. It's not about just one of us. It's about all of us, united behind our shared vision to make America great again. So before the speech, make your contribution to have it displayed right under the live stream of the President's State of the Union. Thanks, Eric Trump. Yes, this is going in the trash where it deserves to be, but the responses to this, this is just from Public Citizen, you know, the organization that Ralph Nader founded back in the 60s or 70s. And it's just Robert Weissman is now the president, Lisa Gilberg the vice president, Craig Holman is the government affairs lobbyist for Public Citizen. Weissman says, Donald Trump is commercializing and corrupting yet another national institution, making this just the latest disgraceful degradation by Trump of the presidency and our public institutions. He said, if Trump is going to do this, we should at least have truth in advertising. This president is brought to you by Goldman Sachs, Dow Chemical, Koch Industries, and coal baron Robert Murray. I would add, you know, Robert and Rebecca Mercer. Lisa Gilbert said, she's been a guest on our program many times, this inappropriate usage of the State of the Union to advertise campaign access is the opposite of drain the swamp. This administration has no shame. This latest outrage underscores the need for national reform of our system of moneyed politics. And Craig Holman said, something like this has never been done before. We hear that a lot about this presidency. The State of the Union address always has been considered an attempt to be a unifying national event. But Trump now is turning it into a campaign fundraising event, which is quite a perversion of the State of the Union. Amen. So meanwhile, the Republican freakout rolls on. They are obviously freaking out because, frankly, there's a very good chance that Donald Trump is going to be impeached for obstruction of justice. And, you know, Devin Nunes is like all in on this thing. So he wrote this memo, Nicholas Fandos, Adam Goldman, and Sharon LaFreniere over at the New York Times today. Secret memo hints at a new Republican target, Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein, or Steen, I'm not sure which, is the number 2 guy at the FBI, or at the Justice Department, excuse me. He's the Deputy Attorney General. A secret, highly contentious Republican memo reveals that Deputy Attorney General Rod J. Rosenstein approved an application to extend surveillance of a former Trump campaign associate shortly after taking office. So here's the bottom line. The whole thing about the Republican memo is that when Rosenstein authorized, went to a FISA court and said to a judge, we need authority for the FBI to wiretap Carter Page, what the record shows is that this had nothing to do with the Steele memo, that they were already looking at Carter Page. They were already, frankly, looking at Donald Trump. They were, but Carter Page had been, used to live in Moscow and had been working, had been going back and forth. And when he went back to Russia, this is, again, before the release of the Steele memo, when he went back to Russia, that was the point at which they said, hey, wait a minute, we should check this out. But the way that the Republicans are spinning it is that it was the Steele memo that caused the FBI to look at Carter Page. And the Republicans are saying the Steele memo was paid for by Hillary Clinton's Democratic National Committee. Not actually true. The Steele memo was initiated by one of the Republicans to take down Donald Trump. As this was during the Republican primary, but finally when Trump won the primary, the Republicans stopped funding the Steele memo and the Democrats picked it up. But the bottom line here is that Nunes and the Republicans are cherry picking intelligence, and they're literally willing to take down the United States. They take down our FBI, our Justice Department, to take down the institutions of governance, the institutions of government in the United States, to try to keep this guy from getting impeached. And frankly, I think that there's probably a pretty good chance that he's going to be impeached. And the whole, Trump impeachment thing is rolling along fairly rapidly. There is, I think you can build a fairly strong case, in fact, for a Trump impeachment. And in fact, point of fact, there's, you got Donald Trump on Air Force One writing a lie for his son Don Jr. I mean, his son Don Jr. had met with a bunch of Russians at Trump Tower. I can't remember how to say her name, but you know what I'm talking about. And the woman lawyer from Russia, and then lied about it. Said that, well, this was Trump had campaigned on, we don't need these sanctions, and of course the Russians were interested in ending the sanctions. But it's not the act itself. It's not the meeting itself. The meeting itself probably didn't even break the law. But covering up the meeting, that is obstruction of justice. And that's what they got Nixon for, you'll recall. That's what they got Bill Clinton for. The two impeachments of the 20th century, the almost impeachment of Nixon that was stopped by him resigning, and the actual impeachment. So David Leonhardt wrote a great piece for the New York Times titled An Article of Impeachment Against Donald J. Trump. And he goes through 10 specific things that Trump can be impeached for. I'll share that with you in just a minute. And then I want to get into this economic news, and then we'll pick up your calls. Your thoughts about the State of the Union is tonight. What do you think is going to happen? What is your State of the Union? How do you think that we should be dealing with this? How should Democrats be responding?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Oh my, let me give a call screener here. McWayne in Chino Valley, Arizona. Hey, McWayne, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
You bet. Yeah, Tom, it seems we're living in a time where decent human beings, dreamers and dreams are colliding with a nightmare, indecent, immoral, racist, bigoted,
authoritarian
fraud of a nightmare.
Yep.
And in league with his republican cult, the cult that worships its god of obscene wealth and power, the same obscenity, which is their master, out of the darkness of these mindless, heartless people, they're casting a shadow over this country in which they're endeavoring to turn the decent into the disposable. I truly believe, though, that President Trump is but a catalyst to energize resistance and insistence on truth, equality, and justice. Or as Gandhi said, love triumphs always, always, and love and a transformative electorate that by multi-millions overcomes their voter suppression and their neo-Jim Crow elections. We will prevail. We certainly will prevail.
I'm very optimistic about that. The arc of justice, of morality, the arc of good government, all those. To badly paraphrase the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, may move slowly. It may be, but it's coming. It's absolutely coming, McWayne. I'm with you. Thank you for the call. Justin in West Hills, California. Hey, Justin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I haven't spoken to you in a little while, and I just wanted to talk to you today about the Democrats choosing Joe Kennedy III to do the rebuttal against President Trump's State of the Union tonight. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to talk about how absolutely stunned I was. But then again, I'm not stunned because you talked about it so poignantly about how the Democrats have basically become a neoliberal class starting in the 90s, and Joe Kennedy represents exactly that. And I just wanted to talk to you real quick about how Joe Kennedy III is against fair trade. He opposes eliminating the inheritance tax, and then these are the two really important parts. Joe Kennedy III is against Medicare for all, and the most important thing, and I'm in California, and this is a big issue where I'm from with a lot of people that have tons of illnesses that this drug saved them from, which is marijuana.
Right. He's against medical marijuana as well as decriminalization of marijuana.
Yes, he is. He is. He thinks marijuana is a gateway drug.
Right.
And what's really, really amazing about him, Tom, is if you look at Open Secrets and you look at all the assets and the money that this man has done business with, Monsanto, ExxonMobil, you name it. You look at Gilead Sciences and Merck & Co., and then also Brandywine. So it makes, all you have to do is follow the money, Tom, and it makes a lot of sense why he is against medical and legalized marijuana. And he's also the 22nd richest member of Congress with an estimated worth of $18.64 million.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the choice I would have made. I would have picked somebody from the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
And real quick, Tom, the youth vote, this is a slap in the face to kids, to the youth
I agree.
who understand.
I absolutely agree with you, Justin. Absolutely agree. Thank you for the call. We'll be back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
I promised you some economic news as well. I want to get into that. We've got the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. Just to finish that little rant, I had lost my my paper for a minute. This is what David Leonhardt put together. I think it's a pretty damn good list. He points out, first of all, that when they threatened to impeach Nixon, they actually drafted articles of impeachment against Nixon, and he saw this coming, and that's why he resigned. Bill Clinton did not resign, but there are some parallels here. The first article of impeachment against Nixon said that he had, quote, prevented, obstructed, and impeded the administration of justice. Okay. And one of the two impeachment articles that the House passed against Bill Clinton used that identical phrase, writes David Leonhardt in today's New York Times. Each list, he says, was meant to show that the president had intentionally tried to subvert a federal investigation. And I would add that he did it with what's called corrupt intent. And here are the things that demonstrate that intent, that corrupt intent. The Trump crime family are, these guys have been, just think about the New York developer market and who's in that market and what goes on. Anyhow, during a dinner, here are the 10 things. Number one, he asked Comey for a pledge of loyalty. Number two, which come on. Number two, he asked when he asked Comey to, quote, let go of the investigation of Michael Flynn, he asked the other people in the room to leave the room first. Now that demonstrates corrupt intent. Now, article number 3 would be that he directed other officials to leave the White House so he could speak privately with Dan Coats, the director of national intelligence, and Mike Pompeo, the CIA director. And he tried to talk them into persuading Comey to back off going after Michael Flynn. Keep in mind, Michael Flynn has already pled guilty to crimes. So there's an actual crime here, and Donald Trump was trying to prevent the prosecution of it, and that's obstruction of justice. That's just number 3. Number 4, in March and April, he told Comey in phone calls that he wanted Comey to, quote, lift the cloud of the investigation. Please stop this. Number 5, he fired Comey on May 9th, and on May 10th, he met with some Russian officials and told them that the firing had, quote, taken off the great pressure of the Russia investigation. And then he told Lester Holt on May 11th, the next day, that the firing was because of this Russia thing. Number 6, again, There may or may not have been a crime, but the cover-up here is a crime. Number 6, on May 17, shortly after hearing that the Justice Department had appointed Mueller, Trump berated Jeff Sessions and accused him of disloyalty. This again demonstrates corrupt intent. Number 7, in June, Trump explored several options to retake control. At one point, he ordered the firing of Mueller before the White House counsel Don McGahn said, no, I'll resign if you do that. Number 8, on Air Force One, he drafted a false public statement for his son Don Jr., claiming that the meeting with the Russian lawyer was just about adoption. Number 9, on July 26 in a tweet, impeachment for a tweet. On July 26 in a tweet, Trump called for the firing of Andrew McCabe, the FBI's deputy director, a potential corroborating witness for Comey's conversation with Trump. Number 10, throughout Trump, and this quotation comes from the Nixon article Impeachment, throughout, Trump made false and misleading public statements for the purpose of deceiving the people of the United States. That's a phrase from the Nixon impeachment, trying to deceive the people of the United States. Trump repeatedly made untruthful statements about American intelligence agencies' conclusions regarding Russia's role in the election. So there you go. That's the impeachment. The economic news I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to do this fairly quickly. This may or may not be a really big deal. The top story at about, 4 o'clock this morning when I was reading this on my phone was that the global bond market is collapsing. And as the bond market is collapsing, Robin Wigglesworth and Eric Platt in New York and Emma Dunkley in Hong Kong writing for the Financial Times, the pressure on the global bond market reverberated across equities on Tuesday, deepening a slide that began at the start of the week amid concern that the roaring stock market rally could be vulnerable to a reversal. The U.S. stocks slid 0.8% in the first minutes of trading, following a sell-off in Europe and a sell-off in Asia. And why? Well, the yield on the U.S. government bond is going up. It's gone up to a 3-year high of 2.73%. It was like 2.0 something. And when bond yields go up, it's more expensive to borrow. And, which makes it difficult for businesses that rely on borrowed money to grow. Goldman Sachs chief global equity strategist Peter Oppenheimer said that a correction is becoming increasingly likely. Larry Hathaway, the chief economist at GAM, an investment group, said this can't go on forever. The 3 biggest exchange-traded bond funds suffered their biggest monthly losses since 2016. Oppenheimer at Goldman Sachs says this does not mean the market is at risk of entering a sustained bear market, but it may mean the market experiences a sharp correction. Now, why? Remember when the Republicans passed their tax scam, $1.5 trillion that they were going to borrow for this $5 trillion gift of tax breaks to billionaires? Well, when the government borrows money, it has to sell bonds. So if the government is trying to sell bonds right now, and the Chinese are no longer buying bonds, and the Fed stopped buying bonds this month, nobody's buying the bonds. And that's why the price or the yield of the bonds, the amount of interest that they pay, is going up. I've got a little more detail on that. I'll fill you in right after the break here at the bottom of the hour. And then we'll pick up your calls on your thoughts on what all this is. And also, your thoughts on Joe Kennedy III. It's going to be an interesting speech tonight.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
My personal take is I much rather would have seen somebody from the Congressional Progressive Caucus doing the rebuttal. But, we'll see how he does.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Fight for the Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great, by Professor Harvey J. Kaye, who's a professor of democracy and justice studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. This is from the introduction, page 1. We need to remember. We need to remember what conservatives have never wanted us to remember and what liberals have all too often forgotten. Now, after more than 30 years of subordinating the public good to corporate priorities and private greed, of subjecting ourselves to widening inequality and intensifying insecurities, and of denying our democratic impulses and yearnings, we need to remember. We need to remember who we are.
We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who rescued the United States from the economic destruction of the Great Depression and defended it against fascism and imperialism in the Second World War. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who not only saved the nation from economic ruin and political oblivion, but also turned it into the strongest and most prosperous country on earth. And most of all, we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who accomplished all that in the face of powerful, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, and despite all their own faults and failings, by making America freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. Now, when all they fought for is under siege, and we, too, find ourselves confronting crises and forces that threaten the nation and all that it stands for, now we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the most progressive generation in American history. We are the children of the men and women who articulated, fought for, and endowed us with the promise of the four freedoms. On the afternoon of January 6, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt went up to Capitol Hill to deliver his annual message to Congress. Just weeks earlier, he had defeated the Republican Wendell Willkie at the polls and won re-election to an unprecedented third term. But Roosevelt now faced a far greater challenge, one even more daunting than those he confronted in his first and second terms. Still stalked by the Great Depression, the United States was also increasingly threatened by the Axis power, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. And with war already raging east and west, Americans had yet to agree about how to respond to the danger. The president, however, did not falter. He not only proceeded to propose measures to address the emergency, he gave dramatic new meaning to all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we the people of the United States, a new birth of freedom, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. FDR knew about crises, but he knew as well what Americans could accomplish even in the darkest of times. Born in 1882, he had grown up privileged, the son of New York Hudson River gentry. Yet long before becoming president, he had suffered serious defeats and setbacks, none more devastating than contracting polio in 1921 at the age of 39. The disease left him permanently unable to stand up or walk without assistance. However, supported by his wife Eleanor and other family members and friends, he had risen above the paralysis to become the most dynamic political figure in the United States. Moreover, his experiences and encounters in the course of doing so had reaffirmed and deepened his already powerful faith and confidence in God, in himself, and in his fellow citizens, all of which had enabled him, in the face of the worst economic and social catastrophe in the nation's history, to defiantly state that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and then go on to proclaim this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. Armed with this faith and confidence and propelled by the popular energies that his words and elections elicited, he determinedly pursued the initiatives of relief, recovery, reconstruction, and reform known as the New Deal. Together, president and people severely tested each other, made mistakes and regrettable compromises, and suffered defeats and disappointments. Nevertheless, challenging each other to live up to their finest ideals, Roosevelt and his fellow citizens advanced them further than either had expected or even imagined possible. Confronting fierce, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, they not only rejected authoritarianism, but also redeemed the nation's historic purpose and promise by initiating revolutionary changes in American government and public life and radically extending American freedom, equality, and democracy. They subjected big business to public account and regulation, empowered the federal government to address the needs of working people, mobilized and organized labor unions, fought for their rights, broadened and leveled the we and we the people, established a social security system, expanded the nation's public infrastructure, improved the environment, cultivated the arts, and refashioned popular culture. And while much remained to be done, they imbued themselves with fresh democratic convictions, hopes, and aspirations. Standing before the American people and their assembled representatives that early January day, the president surely believed their rendezvous with destiny had come. He told them straightforwardly that Americans were now confronting a moment unprecedented in the history of the United States. A moment unprecedented because never before had American security been as seriously threatened from without. and he refused to appease those who threatened our nation's safety. The book is The Fight for the Four Freedoms by Harvey K. Welcome back. Okay, just to wrap up this economic thing, one of the underwriters of our program is the Aiden Forecast, aidenforecast.com, and they do a weekly newsletter, or a kind of a weekly summary and a monthly big 12-page, detailed analysis of what's going on with the economy and, information for investors. And then a fellow who collaborates with them, Chuck Butler, does a daily newsletter called the Daily Pfennig, P-F-E-N-N-I-G, the German word for penny. And he's talking about a Minsky moment in bonds in today's newsletter. That, if you read the Aiden Forecast, you get this newsletter every day. And Hyman Minsky, who has passed away, brilliant economist, I know his son, and he came up with, a formula, as it were, and I'm probably mangling this because I'm not an expert on Hyman Minsky and what he did, but that basically describes how a collapse happens, and that has been referred to as it's coming into the common parlance, lexicon, as a Minsky moment. So here's Chuck Butler writing this morning. What would cause a Minsky moment in bonds? The U.S. Fed has been a very large bond buyer since the first round of quantitative easing began in 2009. And he points out that if you look at the Fed's balance sheet, they went from under $1 trillion in bonds that they were holding after around the time of the crash in 2008, the Bush crash. They went from that to over $4.6 trillion in bonds sitting on their balance sheet. Now, they bought these bonds in order to throw money into the economy. They pull the bonds out, they throw the cash in, right? So this is pouring money into the economy. This is called quantitative easing. And they said that there would be a tapering of this in 2015, and there was. They slowed down their purchases, but they continued to buy them. And then at the end of last year, 2017, they said in 2018, we're not going to buy any more bonds. And guess what? It's next year. So the Fed apparently isn't buying bonds. And he says the question is, who's going to take the Fed's place? Well, there has been no one to date, and the 10-year Treasury yield has risen from 2.05% on September 8 of last year to 2.65% on January 18. And that's just the beginning, he says, in my opinion. He said the Fed may not be the only no-show at the auction window. In other words, it might not just be the Fed who's not buying U.S. Treasuries. And he goes on to say China is considering slowing down the Treasury purchases or halting them altogether. And guess who else has been slowing down the Treasury purchases? Saudi Arabia and Russia. He says this is the Minsky moment for bonds, and no big central bank buying will drive yields much higher. It could be easily followed by another Minsky moment for stocks. This is Chuck Butler's comment. And then he says, this morning I saw this head of interest rate strategy at Wells Fargo saying the same thing. Michael Shoemaker's chief concern right now, who's going to buy all those extra Treasury bonds, Treasury notes? People are worried about Treasury issuance going up, up, up. Well, this is what's going to happen as a result of the $1.5 trillion borrowing that the federal government has to do to support the GOP tax scam. I mean, we all discussed this, right? A month or so ago, the Republicans said, we're going to borrow $1.5 trillion and we're going to give that money to billionaires like the Koch brothers. And everybody was like, oh, no, we can't borrow. Oh, well, okay, I guess it's okay. That's kind of how the Republicans dealt with it, right? Oh, we don't like that. Oh, well, I guess we do. It's going to the Koch brothers, right? It's going to the Mercers. It's going to the billionaires, so it's fine. $1.5 trillion. $1,500 billion. $1,500,000 million. Anyhow, so the Treasury has to issue $1.5 trillion worth of bonds. The Fed is trying to unload $4.6 trillion worth of bonds. Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China are slowing down their bond purchases. This could do it. Maybe not. I'm a lousy forecaster on these things in terms of short-term time. If I was any better, I would have named the title, I would have given the title of my book, The Crash. Instead of The Crash of 2016, I would have titled it The Trash of 2020, just to cover all bets, right? But you never know. Oh, and this from extranewsfeed.com, the Nunes memo has been leaked. Well, maybe sort of. This is actually it's a joke, but it's on the letterhead. You know, it looks all official. And memorandum to the great and honorable, munificent, glorious, and exalted excellency Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, restorer of democracy, freedom, and airline safety. From Chairman David Nunes, a.k.a. Noondog, regarding bias within the Democrat Party. Dearest Mr. President, it is with great sorrow that I report to you, leader of the free world, humble yet great man who is destined for Mount Rushmore, that there is partisanship being shown on the House Intelligence Committee by members of Hillary Clinton's Democrat Party. This bias has extended beyond the campaign and has infected our government, except for the parts you are overseeing. Specifically, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Justice, the Independent Counsel, the NFL, the Grammys, and the fake news media. I have prepared this nonpartisan memo for your eyes only. Plus, the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee, Fox and Friends, Republicans with whom I have spoken while going deep undercover at the White House lawn, and Roger Stone. And it goes on from there. It's kind of funny. And finally, Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and J.P. Morgan Chase are up to something. Actually, I'm going to hold off on that and bring that in on the third hour, because this could be a door opening to single-payer health insurance. I think this is fascinating. It's not why they're doing it, but you know, anyhow, I'll get into this in an hour and a half. Robert in Greenville, North Carolina. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Great. What's up?
Well, to all American registered voters, my wife, who makes approximately $45,000 a year, received her first middle-class tax cut, and it was a whopping $12.01 per week.
Wow.
I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, or Independent, $576.48 a year isn't going to make our lives less difficult. Wake up, middle-class America. Trump doesn't care about us.
What, she's not using her tax cut to build a factory?
It's a joke. You can't even go out and buy 4 new tires for a car.
I know. Yeah, that's why we call it the GOP tax scam. Robert, thanks for sharing that. That's a great one. I appreciate it. Scott in Belgrade, Montana. Hey, Scott, you wanted to talk about Eric Trump's letter that to Fred Flintstone, that I read on the air today?
Yes, sir. First-time caller from Belgrade, Montana, up in super red Trump land. Mm-hmm. And first of all, I'd like to really tell you how thankful I am that I bumped into your show about 2 years ago, and through some of the progressive networks, I've really done a 180 in my political world. So thank you for that. And
you're welcome.
I just have a quick question, then I'll hang up. Is Eric Jr. Colluding with the president to violate the Hatch Act with these fundraising efforts?
The Hatch Act, which says that government officials cannot use government property for commercial purposes, basically.
So tagging it to the State of the Union, maybe it's just campaign finance.
It's an edge.
Ethics problems or something.
Yeah, the way that they're doing it to get around that is that they're taking the State of the Union and they're refeeding it on their campaign website. And this was an email that I got from the Trump campaign. It's the campaign that's begging me for money virtually every day, probably 280
that would be
days a year.
Public product, correct?
No, it's not. The campaign is a private corporation.
Of the union?
No,
okay.
Yeah, and they're adding the chyron, the lower third, the scroll of all the names of people who donated, even $1. They're going to just scroll those probably, super fast or whatever. During the State of the Union address. It's crass, but I guess you would expect that from a Trump. And, these guys are hustling. I mean, you remember Donald Trump in that interview back when he first decided to run for president as the Republican campaign primary was kicking off. He said, I could be the first guy to make a profit running for president of the United States. And
nothing happened on the Republican end at that moment. They said nothing.
Well, they're complicit. So, I mean,
Anyway,
I'm
it's tough duty being a progressive in Montana.
Well, keep it up, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard Gianforte did the State of the State Union Sunday, and he was calling environmentalists extremists, and it was just really ugly.
Wow. Yeah, Gianforte, he's the guy who beat up the reporter, right?
That's correct, the Guardian reporter. And that same reporter, I'd seen a couple interviews with Gianforte that same reporter did, and he was really rude and crass to him every time he engaged.
Which he are you talking about, the reporter or Gianforte?
Gianforte.
Okay.
Gianforte was just super rude. But, he's one to keep an eye out. But anyway, thank you for taking my call and clarification on that.
You're absolutely welcome. Thanks for the call, Scott.
Thanks,
Tom. It's good to hear from you. And, I suspect that you could argue that this is a violation of the Hatch Act. It's certainly a violation of Donald Trump's statement that his sons would not be involved in government stuff, that they were going to be running his company, unless his campaign and his company are kind of merging, in which case we might be in Hatch Act territory, or just, garden variety corruption. I would add this to the list of things that make Trump impeachable, frankly, but I'm not a constitutional scholar. That would be a good question to ask John Dean. We'll have to get him back on the program. Anyhow, we'll be back in just a few minutes with more of your calls and, of course, my thoughts on the news of the day as we continue through the day. And get ready. Ro Khanna is going to be with us in the next hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Ro Khanna, by the way, is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Barbara in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
What's really on my mind today, and I really like the backdrop that you have when your program first come on. That is a beautiful mountain range. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's Mount Hood here in Oregon.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful.
We can see that from downtown Portland.
What's really bothering me is that we, the people, did not vote for Donald Trump, have to sit and listen to this farce that is going to be called the State of the Union. We have some people that are going, some people that are going to protest. We literally know that what he is saying, he has not done this. We are still living off the bottom part, I think, maybe I'm wrong, of Obama's economy.
Yeah.
And from what I see, it's starting to really, really fall.
Yep.
Okay, you gave a tax cut, but the people that's going to get the tax cut is not going to do anything to help America.
No, and the tax cut is going to drive down drive up the yield on bonds, which is going to drive down the price of bond funds, which is collapsing the bond market all around the world, which is going to lead to a horrible recession because,
okay, like you were saying just a minute ago, who's going to buy these bonds? China don't need our bonds.
Right. And Russia is saying, to hell with you guys.
Arabia, they don't need their bonds. They never have. They got oil gushing from every spot.
Yep.
Thing and everything's over there. The 30% of this country, to me, is getting too much credit for nothing. Most of them have never contributed. They always take.
Yeah.
The people that are contributing, let's say there's a young couple right now that thinks the economy is doing pretty good because that's what they're being told.
Mm-hmm.
They run out here, they buy a house. Let's say they buy a house for $180,000. They got $400,000, they fix it up. What is going to happen when everything fails? They lose a home?
Right. Well, that's, we saw this just 10 years ago. Excuse me, Barbara.
I'm scared. I'm literally scared. I'm scared of what is going to happen to this country. And when it falls, it's going to hurt a lot of people. And for some strange reason, we have to listen and let these people run this country that literally, they're patriots, but they're not citizens. I hope you understand what I'm talking about when I say citizen. A citizen is a person that cares about the guy next door and the guy down the street, the kid that don't have a home, the kid that's hungry. This is what a citizen does. A patriot just waves the flag and try to get what he can get. He's a bigot. He's a racist, and basically he doesn't care. And this is what we're allowing this 30% to make this country. The 70%, let's keep marching, let's keep marching, let's keep marching.
Yep.
Because as Hedron told the Romans, how are we going to do this? Brick by brick. We have to do this brick by brick. God bless America. And Tom, keep on doing what you're doing, because you're one of the fighters, you're one of the citizens, you're one of the soldiers on the front line. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Barbara. They're very, very well said. I would add, you called them patriots. Samuel Johnson back in the 1700s said, patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. I would call them scoundrels. I mean, this is, these guys, they claim patriotism. They claim great love of country and nation and, highfalutin notions and whatnot. But then when it comes time to actually execute, to actually do the things that would help your nation, they do the exact opposite. We'll be back. Stick around.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Check it out. Catherine in Las Vegas, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Catherine, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks. If I can make two quick points about the State of the Union. First, about Joe Kennedy being this election.
Mm-hmm.
I keep hearing from the media, we know what Democrats are against. What are they for? I think the Kennedys in general remind people what Democrats stood for, Bobby especially, and what they stand for. And Joe Kennedy, if you've listened to any of his speeches, although he's not one of the leading progressive voices, he is very progressive.
But he's hang on just a second. He's opposed to, or he's supportive of NAFTA, TPP, the trade agreement kind of stuff. Number one, and number two, he is opposed to even medical marijuana. I mean, how does these things I think are really going to hurt him, and I think frankly choosing him is going to hurt the Democratic Party. I may be wrong.
Right, but completely getting out of TPP and now allowing China to negotiate with all of the island nations and Pacific nations there hurts us. We're completely left out of the game now. I mean, just that's not true, and running from these.
We are doing. We actually did more business with. We're doing more business with China right now than we ever have done. In fact, our trade deficit last year, the first year of the Trump administration, was the worst trade deficit we've had in almost a decade. In other words, we're buying more of China's stuff.
If China negotiates a trade deal and leaves us out of it, and we're completely left out of the mark, whereas before we were having the opportunity to negotiate, not saying that that particular deal was exactly it, but completely walking away from the bargaining table doesn't do us any favors. But the other point about the State of the Union is that when there's literally nothing to gain from watching it. Forget the fact that Trump's presidency is completely illegitimate. We know all about now Russia and the Trump administration's fiddling with the elections and whatnot. But most of it's probably going to be lies written by someone else and then spoken by a man who's basically sounding out words on a teleprompter who probably doesn't even comprehend half of what he's reading.
Yes, it's going to be teleprompter Don.
And right, it's basically there is no purpose to it other than continuing to prop up the illusion of this man who was legitimized by massive media presence. If his speeches weren't televised 24/7, he would not have been legitimized. Yeah. He wouldn't have had all this free media. He wouldn't be who he is. And by us watching it, we are contributing to his legitimization. And we all know that the speech is, like I said, it's a farce. It's somebody else's words read by a man who can't comprehend them, and most of them will be lies. Right. So I encourage everybody, not just for the State of the Union, but every time he's on, to turn the channel.
Yeah.
Because
I've reached the point, similarly, Catherine, I've reached the point where MSNBC and CNN have this horrible habit of bringing Trump supporters on to spew lies that more often than not are not rebutted. And I just changed the channel. We're watching digitally. And so I know that the networks are able to see at exactly which point people change the channel and track that back to their segments and their guests. They're getting real granular in their metrics on this kind of stuff now. The same way that Facebook does. They know everything, every like that you've ever liked, so that they can build your profile. And I am hopeful that that's considered essentially a vote, although I realize in a capitalist system there are no votes. But yeah. Excellent point.
But
Catherine?
but media is what created him, and ratings control media. Yeah. And if the ratings for Trump go away, so does his 24/7 coverage, and that's how we retake power back from him.
One would hope. Catherine, thank you. Tom in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm thinking about the Progressive Congressional Caucus and how they can't get their message out, as you pointed out with the rebuttal of Trump's speech.
That's because the media really would rather have neoliberal Democrats on TV than progressive Democrats. And you get people like, Stephanie Ruhle saying, oh, we don't want to go to the far left. Right. Far left is the Communist Party. It doesn't exist anymore.
So you're saying the media chooses who the Democrat spokesman is going to be?
Absolutely. No. That decision was made by Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and I think it was a bad decision. But I may be proven wrong tonight. We'll see. I mean, we'll see. But
it's consistent. The progressives are frozen out. I mean, Keith Ellison was running to be the head of the DNC. He didn't get that, and I firmly believe it's because. And I've mentioned this to you before, in poll after poll, on issue after issue, the progressive position gets 55 to 90% support from the public.
I know. It's my regular rant. It is not left wing. It's right down the middle. It's all American. And if we want to change this, Tom, the reason that the Democratic Party does not promote the Progressive Caucus is because they're not yet more than half of the Democratic Party in Congress. And so our job is to get progressives elected in a way that doesn't damage the Democratic Party, but builds and strengthens the Democratic Party. And that means getting out there, getting active, showing up locally, participating. Tom, thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll be back with Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader, and this is from page 39, chapter titled An Informed and Educated Electorate. The epigraph, the quote that opens the chapter, is from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Whenever the people are well informed, however, they can be trusted with their own government, that whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them right. Into the chapter. Talk Radio News Service, based in Washington, D.C., is owned and run by my dear friend Ellen Ratner. Ellen is an experienced and accomplished journalist, and a large number of interns and young journalism school graduates get their feet wet in reporting by working for her. In March 2010, I was in Washington for a meeting with a group of senators, and I needed a studio from which to do my radio and TV show. Ellen was gracious enough to offer me hers. I arrived as three of her interns were producing a panel discussion type of TV show for web distribution at talkmedianews.com, in which they were discussing for their viewing audience their recent experiences on Capitol Hill. One intern panelist related that a White House correspondent for one of the big three TV networks had told her that the network registered a huge amount of interest in the hot story that week of a congressman's sexual indiscretions. Far less popular were stories about the debates on health care, the conflicts in the Middle East, and even the Americans who had died recently in Iraq or Afghanistan. The intern said, so that's the story they have to run with on the news, relating the substance of the network's correspondents' thoughts, because that's what the American people want to see. If the network doesn't give people what they want to see, viewers will tune away, and the network won't have any viewers, ratings, or revenues. The other two interns commiserated with the first about what a shame it was that Americans wanted the titillating stories instead of the substantive ones, but they accepted without question that the network was therefore obliged to, quote, give people what they want, end quote. When they finished their panel discussion, I asked these college students if they knew that there was a time in the United States when radio and TV stations and news networks broadcast the actual news instead of infotainment because the law required them to. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. But the reality is that from the 1920s, when radio really started going big in the United States, until Reagan rolled it back in 1987, federal communications law required a certain amount of public service programming from radio and television stations as a condition of retaining their broadcast licenses. The agreement was basic and simple. In exchange for the media owners being granted a license from the Federal Communications Commission to use their airwaves, owned by the public, they had to serve the public interest first, and only then could they go about the business of making money. If they didn't do so, when it came time to renew their license, public groups and individuals could show up at public hearings on the license renewal and argue for the licenses being denied. One small way that stations lived up to their public service mandate was by airing public service announcements for local nonprofit groups, community calendars, and other charitable causes. They also had to abide by something called the Fairness Doctrine, which required them to air diverse viewpoints on controversial issues. Separately, during election campaigns, broadcasters had to abide by the equal time rule, which required them to provide equal airtime to rival candidates in any election. But the biggest way that they proved that they were providing a public service and meeting the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine was by broadcasting the news, real news, actual news, local, national, and international news produced by professional old-school journalists. Because the news didn't draw huge ratings like entertainment shows, although tens of millions of Americans did watch it every night on TV and listen to it at the top of every hour on radio from coast to coast. And because real news was expensive to produce, with bureaus and correspondents all over the world. News was a money loser for all of the big three TV networks and for most local and radio and national radio and TV stations. But it was such a sacred thing. This was, after all, the keystone that held together the station's license to broadcast and thus to do business. It didn't matter if it lost money. It made all the other money-making things possible. Through much of the early 1970s, I worked in the newsroom of a radio station in Lansing, Michigan. It had been started and was then run by three local guys, an engineer, a salesman, and a radio broadcaster. They split up the responsibilities like you expect, and all were around the building most days and would hang out from time to time with the on-air crew, all except the sales guy. I was forbidden from talking with him because I worked in news. There could be no hint, ever, anywhere, that our radio station had violated the FCC's programming in the public interest mandate by, for example, my going easy on an advertiser in a news story or promoting another advertiser in a different story. News had to be news, separate from profits and revenue. And if it wasn't, I'd be fired on the spot. News, in other words, wasn't part of the free market. It was part of our nation's intellectual commons, and thus the price of the station's license. After Reagan blew up the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, two very interesting things happened. The first was the rise of right-wing hate speech talk radio, starting with Rush Limbaugh that very year. The second, which really stepped up after President Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of '96, was that the money-losing news divisions of the big three television networks were taken under the wings of their entertainment divisions and wrung dry. Foreign bureaus were closed, reporters were fired, stories that promoted the wonders of advertisers owned by the same mega corporations began to appear, and investigative journalism began to die. It's the Thom Hartmann Reader.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna represents the 17th District of California. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website, khanna.house.gov, Khanna. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna, Khanna. Congressman, welcome to the program.
Tom, it's great to be on. I'm a fan of your show.
Well, thank you. I should say welcome back to the program. You were on with Alex Lawson, I believe.
You've got a good memory. And, I was actually out in Los Angeles last week, and people were saying there that they first learned of Bernie Sanders because he used to come on your show every week. So you and he both have an interesting following.
Yeah, he did that for 11 years, every Friday. It was pretty remarkable. You have, first of all, I understand that you can be with us for the hour or for a half hour?
I can be here as long as they don't call votes. So the votes could be called at 1:30 any time, but I'm hoping I can stay up till then.
Okay, so up until 1:30.
Yeah, but sometimes they may, the votes are out of our control, so it may be up to 1:45 or.
Okay, cool.
We can.
Well, we'll play it by ear, but and you're fine with taking calls from our listeners, right?
I'd love to.
Okay, great. So let's get to that in just a second. First, I've got a question for you. Tell me about the Citizens Sovereignty Act, this piece of legislation you're sponsoring that involves democracy dollars. This is really a cool idea. Please tell our listeners about this.
Well, I appreciate it. It's an idea that Larry Lessig and Bruce Ackerman, two great constitutional law professors, came up with, and they tried to solve this issue. If we can't overturn Citizens United, I mean, everyone wants to overturn Citizens United, but in the meantime, what can we do to help our democracy? And their idea is very simple. Every American who votes should get $50, and they should be able to use that money to either support their member of Congress, a Senate, or a presidential candidate. And every person will have to decide. They either can continue to spend their private money, and in that case, they don't get the benefit of getting these democracy dollars, as they're called, or they can opt into the system. So the basic idea is instead of United, while we can, to flood the private money and swamp it with money for citizens. basically have about $6.8 billion in spending, and that would actually dwarf all of the private money.
That's remarkable. Congressman, your phone is fading in and out. I don't know if you're on a cell phone or what, but it's really gotten bad here. If you could.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. Now it sounds fine. Okay.
Great. Well, great. So the basic gist is, look, let's say someone was running for Congress. One person says, okay, I'm going to use my own money and raise private dollars. Then they can't have the democracy dollars. The other person says, no, I'm going to raise the money $50 at a time from citizens. About 200,000 people vote in a district, and they all get the $50. So let's say they say, okay, we're going to give $20 to a congressional race.
It's $1 million.
That person could raise about $4 million.
Wow, that's substantial. I think it's great, and encourage people to check it out and support the Citizen Sovereignty Act. What, in your opinion, tonight is the State of the Union address, what do you think that Democrats need to do in this election cycle? It's going to happen this year in November and in 2020. What are the 3, 4, 5 reduced to a bumper sticker issues that you would encourage the Democratic Party to put front and center and campaign on, and that hopefully Joe Kennedy will speak about tonight?
Well, I think we've got to be specific. I think we can't just engage in platitudes saying we want better jobs, better wages. I think people want to know, what are we going to do? Bernie Sanders, in part, has laid out several issues, as have others. I mean, we should be for Medicare for all and make the case that that's universal health care, but it's also going to help create more entrepreneurs and be competitive. We should be for free college. It's ridiculous in this country that people have to take out so much student debt. I mean, I had to take out $100,000 of debt to finish law school. There's no other country, developed country, that you have to take that kind of debt to go to school. We should be for massive investments in infrastructure that we know creates jobs, not just roads and bridges, but high-speed internet and fiber, and looking at cities like Chattanooga and Birmingham and Columbus that had made those investments and now are creating new jobs. And we should be for apprenticeship investments and vocational credentialing so that people have the opportunities for the jobs of the future. So I think, we ought to lay out a bold, populist economic platform.
Yeah. I heard a conservative on one of the television networks the other day just going off of, Democrats just want to give things away. And my response would be, yeah. Yeah. Or they just want to tax people. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. It worked really well in the United States when we had a 50 to 70 to 90% top tax rate from the 1930s through the 1980s, and the middle class grew at the fastest rate it ever had. And we took that money and we recycled it back to working people. The GI Bill was the biggest example, I think, of a wild success. And then, of course, Medicare and Medicaid in the 60s, and obviously Social Security came out of the 30s. All of these programs, I'm all in favor of that.
Well, you're absolutely right, and your policies would actually lead to economic growth, because we know. I mean, here's the bottom line. The Republican tax plan, it gives the vast amount of the money to corporate executives and shareholders. They're not going to go buy more things. They're not going to put that money into the economy. Even their own PR and rhetoric, right, where they say, these companies are giving one-time bonuses of $1,000 while the corporate tax cut is permanent. Even if you look at that, that means that they are getting about $2 billion total, while the corporations are getting $100 billion. That means 50 times more the break is going to investors and corporations than ordinary Americans. Now, if we did what you said, which is actually to give some of this money directly to workers, as opposed to giving 1/50th to workers, you would actually raise wages, which is the biggest challenge in the country, because wages have stagnated. And guess what? Those people are actually going to spend that money in the United States, buy things, and that's going to create economic growth. The challenge is this is not theoretical. We know that this is what grows the economy, and yet the Republicans keep doubling down on this investor class, shareholder class, instead of giving money directly to workers through expanding the earned income tax credit or raising the minimum wage or programs that are actually going to deal with the gross income inequality.
Yeah, we're talking with Congressman Ro Khanna of California, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You want to pick up some phone calls?
That would be great.
Okay, let's do it. Randy in Tampa, Florida. Randy, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hi, Congressman Khanna. Thanks for talking with me. Tom, thank you also. I'm an over-the-road truck driver. I've been doing this for 17 years, and I just found out 2 days ago that this tax scam has taken away my daily standard meal allowance. And this kind of ties into what just Congressman Khanna just spoke. I'm a little dejected and depressed and angry. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. I'm outnumbered here 3-1, conservative Republican truck drivers to progressive liberal truck drivers. And this is a shout out to Heidi, a fellow progressive truck driver, who let me know about this. So I don't know what to say. It's a tax scam. They just took away money for me for my tax return in 2019.
Right, and they gave it to Charles and David Koch.
Right. And I learned this term last year, velocity of money. I'm part of that engine for that velocity of money. In 17 years I've been driving, I have not really delivered any parts for yachts, or any products for yachts. I've delivered clothes, food, everything that the middle class needs.
Yep.
So
Randy,
maybe somebody out there, yeah.
My apologies. We're hitting a break here. We'll have to ask the congressman to respond on the other side of the break. But Randy, you make a great point, and hopefully it'll flip some truck drivers progressive. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with Congressman Ro Khanna. Stick around. You can tweet him at Rep, REPROKHANNA. And welcome back, Congressman. You want to respond to Randy?
Yeah.
I'd like to. Sirius XM just went into a commercial break, but our non-commercial stations are still with us. So when we come back from this break, I'd like you to recap whatever you're going to say. But go for it.
Sure. Well, I appreciate Randy speaking out. I mean, that's the best response we can give to the Trump tax plan is not having people like me, but actual working Americans like Randy talk about what's going to happen. I mean, as he pointed out, this is taking away the tax relief from working Americans, and it's giving it to large corporations and large companies and executives. And I guess if you think that the problem in our country is that the stock market wasn't doing as well, or the investor class wasn't making enough money, or CEOs weren't making enough money, then you'd be for the Republican plan. But if you have the view that every economist does, that the challenge in our country is people like Randy are not getting a pay raise, they're being left behind while a lot of other people are making money, then the best policy would have been to say, hey, for $1.5 trillion, we could have given every person like Randy in this country a $10,000 pay raise. And that's what Sherrod Brown and I proposed a bill to expand massively the earned income tax credit. So everyone making under $75,000 would get $10,000 back at the end of the year.
Whoa.
And that still would have been cheaper than the Republican tax plan. So, the frustrating part is when the Republicans lie and say that somehow this is going to help workers. I mean, they should just be honest. They're giving a huge break to corporations. But to pretend that it's going to help people like Randy is just totally dishonest.
Yeah, there you go. George in Mobile, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good afternoon. I just want to make a statement about the tax cut. My wife just received her first paycheck with the tax cut in it, and it's just enough to cover 2 Happy Meals, and that's it. And with the price of gas that has gone up, that tax cut is gone. And that's my statement. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you, George. Congressman, your thoughts?
Well, George, I appreciate it. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's the tax cut is temporary. First of all, your wife and you may see it for this 1 year, and it's 1/50th of the tax cuts that the corporations are getting, and the corporations' tax cuts are permanent. I mean, I don't know what the Republicans think. That the American people are not fools. I mean, they will see that the vast majority of this tax money is going to corporations, and crumbs are going to ordinary Americans, and that's what's so outrageous about this plan. And what it limits us from doing is actually providing tax relief for working families and a pay raise, or investing in our infrastructure to create jobs, or safeguarding Social Security, or increasing Social Security benefits, or providing Medicare for all. They're mortgaging that future just to help corporations.
Yeah, it's amazing. Congressman, we just have about 10 seconds. There's some speculation out there. I'm one of the people speculating that borrowing $1.5 trillion, in other words, issuing bonds, is killing the bond market right now, which is going to kill the stock market. Thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a temporary bubble. I mean, right now the stock market is going up because corporations are getting a huge tax break. But at long term, this is not going to be sustainable given the bond market and also what it's going to mean for long-term economic growth.
Yeah, and actually the stock market is going down right now. The top headline in the Financial Times: Wall Street adds to global stock sell-off, and then U.S. stocks slide as bond sell-off rattles investors. It's amazing. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Is with us answering your questions. Congressman, a quick summary of your response to Randy, the truck driver who called just a minute ago.
Sure. Randy pointed out that the Republican tax plan doesn't do anything to help him. All the benefits are going to the investors, to stockholders. And really, if we wanted to help people like Randy, truck drivers, we could have taken the $1.5 trillion and given every American a $10,000 raise who was making under $75,000. Instead, those Americans are being asked to pay for tax benefiting the stockholders and CEOs and the executive class. Bottom line, if you have a lot of dividends that you're getting from the stock market, or if you're part of the executive team of multinational corporations, you'd benefit from this tax plan. If you're making a living by working hard, as a truck driver, as a nurse, as a firefighter, as a factory worker, this plan is horrible for you.
Yeah. Let me get this straight. You and Sherrod Brown, he in the Senate, you in the House, jointly introduced legislation to compete with the Republican tax plan. Your tax plan would take the same amount of money, $1.5 trillion, and say, okay, you guys are committed to borrowing $1.5 trillion and giving it to Americans to stimulate the economy. Let's give it to working Americans. Anybody who earns less than $75,000 is going to get a $10,000 raise by how?
By the expansion of the earned income tax credit, which, by the way, was a Republican idea. It was a Milton Friedman idea. Basically, it says if you're working up to $75,000, you're making that at the end of the year, you fill out for a tax credit, earned income tax credit, and you get up to $10,000. And that would be about $1.5 trillion, but it would actually give the money to working families. Instead, you've got the Republican plan, which is, while we want to give the money to corporations, so we hope one day give it to workers. I mean, it's an absurd idea. If you want to raise wages for workers, just give the money to workers.
Yeah,
rocket science.
Well, it's a real statement of the media malpractice in the United States that most Americans have no idea that every American could have gotten $10,000. Every American making less than $75,000 could have gotten $10,000 out of this tax scam, but instead they chose to give that money to the Koch brothers and the big corporations. Anyhow, let's get our callers in here. Joe in Cupertino, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, thank you so much, Tom. Congressman Khanna, you've got to listen to Tom's imitation of Senator McConnell. He is just hilarious. At any rate, I'm just so grateful that you're on the show. I thank Tom for introducing me to Bernie. My question is, sir, I recently read an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it was discussing this hepatitis A outbreak in Southern California, but it was relating to the chronic homelessness as being the core solution to the problem. As we go about health care and our homeless population in the community that we live in here in the Bay Area, it's just worse and worse. I don't know what the federal government's responsibility is in this manner, but it's got to be addressed because I think it's a public health issue. What do you think?
Thank you, Joe.
Well, Joe, I appreciate it. I appreciate you calling for Cupertino in my district so you understand the income inequality in Silicon Valley. I mean, we have multi-billionaires, and then we have a huge homeless population. And everyone knows what we need. We need investment in affordable housing. We need to have vocational training or job training to be able to provide people with an opportunity to get back up on their feet and work. We need health care and, in many cases, mental health counseling so people can get holistic care. It's just a matter of values. I mean, and these are the types of things that the Trump administration is cutting. And so you have this irony that the president who campaigned on the forgotten Americans is passing policies that are helping those who are doing very well and doing absolutely nothing about issues of homelessness.
So, Congressman, we just have, we've got about a minute here, a minute and a half. Bob in Roanoke, Virginia. You got a real quick question for the Congressman?
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Congressman. Yes. What about the sanctions? It was announced that wasn't going to be renewed by the State Department through the Trump administration. That's a slap in the face.
Yeah, Congress passed that pretty overwhelmingly, didn't they, Bob? Congressman?
It is. It was 98-2. I think only 3 House members also didn't vote for it. And here you have the president unilaterally deciding not to impose the sanctions. More than the foreign policy implications, the issue is this is a president who is totally flouting the will of institutions, indifferent to Congress. I mean, really having no respect for separation of government or branches of government.
Right. Congressman, your phone is getting pretty loud. Are you walking over to take a vote?
I am walking to take a vote, and so I apologize for that, but I should be indoors in a few minutes.
No, it's all good, and I understand. But we only have 10 seconds left here. So thank you so much for being with us for this half hour and taking people's calls. And good luck on your vote, Congressman Ro Khanna. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Great talking with you, Congressman Khanna. You can find his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep R-E-P Ro R-O Khanna, KHANNA Rep Ro Khanna, and thank him for being on the program on Twitter if you'd like. And we'll be back. I'll pick up your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day, my thoughts on it, and your calls. Stick around. Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths, to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who is Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it, "OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace, we will." After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda, or at each agency. When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers, as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make his point That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features a judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's even worse than you think, by David K. Johnston.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV.
Marvin here with you, and Chris in Petaluma, California. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Good morning, Tom. I heard about this Trump not enacting the Russian sanctions.
Yeah, he's saying just the threat of sanctions was enough to get Russia to behave themselves.
This is not. That's a coup. It's Congress passed this nearly unanimously. He doesn't get to do that. What are we going to do about this?
Well, Congress can censure him. Congress can complain. Congress can even pass another law. They can. I believe that there's a provision where Congress can actually get around a presidential. This is essentially a pocket veto, ignoring a law. I'm not sure of the details of exactly how that happens. I'd have to, get somebody who's a parliamentarian who knows how it all works. But this is going to be a test. It's going to be real interesting to see how Congress responds to Donald Trump not executing essentially the laws of the land. I mean, and it's just
one of the major things.
Right, but the other question, Chris, and I have not read the sanctions legislation, so it's possible that the law did not say you must enact the sanction. That the law said instead you have a certain period of time. I think it's probably 90 days. To determine whether or not Russia has complied with our request that they, whatever the specific complaints were in there. And if they have complied, no problem. And if they haven't complied, then you nail them with the sanctions. And if that's what the law said, which is not unreasonable, if that's what the law said, then Trump was probably entirely within his powers to say, okay, cool. Well, they're behaving themselves, and this is what we're going to do. I think that he should provide some more granular detail, some backup to it, other than just it was enough. But that's the situation. Chris, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Dan in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I'm a pretty progressive person. I'm in Alabama. Democrat leadership, I feel like Democratic, feel like they totally diss the base. They never throw us even a bone.
That's not true.
Kennedy, all right, maybe they do some. Joe Kennedy, I looked it up a little bit.
They throw us a lot of bones. I mean, again, the progressives are not more than 50% of elected Democrats right now at the federal level. And so, no surprise that, we're not in charge. And to fix that, rather than complaining about the DNC, and Dan, thanks for the call, instead of complaining about the Democratic Party, and it is the Democratic Party, that was the name Thomas Jefferson gave it. Of course, it was originally the Democratic Republican Party, and then they dropped the word Republican in the 1820s. And it's been the Democratic Party, the oldest and longest standing political party in the history of the world, to the best of my knowledge. If we want to make the Democratic Party more progressive, and we don't want to feel like we're getting breadcrumbs, and we want to see a genuine progressive rebutting the State of the Union address, get more progressives elected. It's just that simple. And the way you do that is you show up at your local Democratic Party and you say, hi, I'd like to be part of this organization. I'd like to join the Democratic Party. I'd like to be a precinct committee person. I'd like to volunteer. I'd like to chip in. But if you become a precinct committee person, you're the one who chooses the primary candidates. And so you open the door to progressives and you get them in there. And you're the one who chooses the party platform. And so you write a progressive party platform. It literally is the most powerful position in politics in America right now. And it's like in most states, in most counties, in most places, you can just walk in the door and say, hi, I'm here. So although in some places, it's, you can actually get paid for it. Devon in Washington, D.C. Hey, Devon, what's on your mind today? Devon? Okay, let's try Charles in Sugarloaf, California. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Hope I get through this. Hey, I have a question for legislators. I was hoping to catch the congressman. I want to know if they win election or win re-election in 2018. In my point of view, the truly revolutionary of the American Revolution was the ballot and the reality that we, the rabble, could, if we could bring together a Democratic majority, tax the property. We could tax the billionaire class of real and, for the moment, corporate persons in proportion to their income, their wealth, and their profits. And so my question on that regard to any legislator, are they prepared to advocate strenuously in Congress for taxing the billionaire class and refunding the people's treasury as it was in 1951 when the upper marginal rate was 91, or when Reagan took office when it was still above 70%.
Yeah.
And when that happens, the treasury is funded. When capitalists do not hire, we the people can hire. We can do infrastructure, research and development, and everything else.
Yeah, I'm with you. I am with you. And, I think it could be a substantial thing, a real event, and we need to make that happen. Thank you, Charles. Craig in Akron, Ohio, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Craig, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing, sir?
Good. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, I just wanted to let you know that a friend of mine who's she owns a tax company. She does my taxes for me. She told me that next year, actually this year, in 2018, I drive for the company, and I go out and I work and help other businesses grow, and I get paid back for my mileage.
Right.
They're not going to do that anymore?
Yeah, you can't deduct it from your taxes. Yeah, that was part of the GOP tax scam. It was fairly widely reported, not on Fox News, of course, but it was fairly widely reported before the thing passed. I was surprised there wasn't just a groundswell of outrage from the trucking community, and it just didn't happen. It's just incredible.
Well, I'm not a trucker. I'm a regional sales manager.
Yeah, anybody who drives for a living, anybody who expenses their expenses, and we're finding, more and more of these little nuggets in this thing. But that one was widely reported. And, it's just so sad when you consider it. We had a truck driver who called in to speak with Congressman Khanna back, must have been, just about exactly a half hour ago. And I
was hoping he was going to bring up that topic. So but he didn't. So I thought, well, heck, I'm going to give you a call, Tom.
Yeah. Well, the truck driver.
I didn't know that.
What the truck driver said was that, 5 out of 6, I believe he said, or 4 out of 5 of his truck driving colleagues are right wing, are conservative. And if that's the case, if all they listen to is right wing hate radio and watch Fox News, the Fox so-called news, then they had no idea that this was coming, and it just kneecapped them. It's incredible.
Right.
It's just incredible. It's what happens when you have this kind of media control. Craig, thanks for the call. Very well said. Bertha in Washington, D.C. Hey, Bertha, what's on your mind?
Praise the Lord. How you doing?
I'm well. Hope you are too.
I just want to make a statement. Until men, women, boys, and girls get the love of God in their hearts, nothing is going to ever change. Due to the simple reason God owns the earth and the heavens, even own me and you. So that's my topic for today. The love of God.
There you go. I'm with you, Bertha.
They will have to get the love of God. I'm talking about not the heart that we see, but the heart that God puts in us.
Yes.
And it's called love.
Yep. And
so nothing will ever change because he made us all in his image.
Very, very well said.
We're all the same.
Yep.
We're all the same people.
Spot on.
And all the rich think they got it made, but they don't.
Yep. And in fact, Bertha, there's a huge body of psychological and sociological science that shows that the wealthier someone is, the less likely they are to have that love of God in their heart, the less likely they are to have empathy, the less likely they are to be able to identify with people who are in crisis or even care. And that's one of the reasons that, frankly, we need to tax the rich. Bertha, thank you for the call. Lou in Grandview, Indiana. Hey, Lou, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Good day to you.
Good day to you, Lou.
As far as the State of the Union goes, I just see it as a really pathetic state. State of being dazed and confused. And it's like I was watching all this nonsense with all this stuff with those Republican guys, and that came to my mind is they repurposed a saying from a generation ago, and they're, for the Republicans, I'd rather be red than dead. And, I find it appalling what they're doing, and I think all those guys need to be, I don't know, impeached or.
No, we just vote them out. We just, we elect progressive Democrats to replace them. It's real simple. And that's a great little play on words on the old "better dead than red" slogan against communism from back in the day. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm completely with you.
Well,
thank you, Lou. Richard in Owego, New York. Do I have that right, Richard?
Oh, it's Owego.
Owego. Great. We got 1 minute to the break. What's up?
All right. I just want to say that there hasn't been nearly enough backlash about this new tax plan and how it affects senior citizens, and that the Republicans go around bragging that they've doubled the standard exemption. The fact is, in 2018, the standard exemption for a married couple is going to go to $13,000. In addition to that, if both you and your spouse are over age 65, you get an additional $2,500. And then the personal exemption for two people would have been $8,100. And that means that next year the standard deduction along with the personal exemption would have been $23,600. And now it's going to be $24,000. That's a long ways from being doubled.
Yeah, it's a $400 increase.
Yeah, the other side of that is I cannot find out anywhere what, if anything, is going to happen to that extra exemption for senior citizens. The $2,500 increase, if you look on this, you get that 20.
Yeah. Richard, you're fading out. What happened to Richard? He's still there?
I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
Getting your music.
Yeah, I lost part of it. We can sort of pot the music down just a little bit. We can sort of talk over there we go. Well, actually, we're hitting the break here, Richard. Richard, thank you for the call. I don't know the answer to your question. I'll have to look for it. Hopefully somebody can call in who knows. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In about 4 or 5 minutes, we're going to check in with Talk Media News, and we'll continue taking your calls. And I have some amazing information for you about Afghanistan and healthcare at the top of the hour. Welcome back. Devon in Washington, D.C. Shall we try it again, Devon?
Yes, thank you for a second bite at the apple. So the Democratic Party needs to do what the country is saying they want, and this crosses both parties, which is to legalize marijuana. Now, Tulsi Gabbard and the Republican guy, Carter, I think his last name is, from Virginia, they introduced in the House H.R. 1227 last session to end the prohibition. It's a multifaceted issue. Not only would it cut down drastically on the number of people of color who end up in prison, it would cut down drastically on the cost of law enforcement, incarceration. There's a lot of literature out there saying that in states that have legalized marijuana, opioid deaths go down. Opioid overdoses
by between 25 and 33%. It's amazing.
There you go. The other thing, if we're building this wall for $25 billion, supposedly to keep drugs out, why don't we build money here in America? It's this huge cash cow waiting to be milked. Well, I'm not sure I like that, but, I don't understand why neither party is listening to the people in this country. We want, net neutrality, and we want legalized marijuana. We want to build small businesses in every state around the country and employ people, especially in coal country, in Virginia and West Virginia, where people are out of jobs, but they've got soil. And guess what? They did prohibition. They know how to run weed.
Yeah.
So let's get it out from underneath the table. Let's get that money into circulation so that people are paying taxes, so that people have got jobs. And, I don't understand how they ignore it and why they picked Kennedy, who was so vocal against, legalizing marijuana, is a real shame, because there are other people, that they could have called on to make this point. And I think that it helped motivate some people to vote for Bernie, certainly not the only issue, but it's a tried, tested, true motivator. So what the heck? Let's get with the program.
I agree. I completely agree, Devon. Very well said. Thank you. Thank you for the call. Jim in Pachogue, New York. Am I saying it? I'm sure I'm mangling it, Jim. What's up?
It's an Indian name. It's Patchogue.
Patchogue. Okay, great. So what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for your fine work. I would just offer a suggestion to your listeners that if they were going to take in the State of the Union address tonight, to not watch it on television, but actually listen to it on a radio program, and then make your own type of notes.
That's interesting, because radio is much harder to measure audience than television.
Yeah.
And
I do this every year, and people that are not articulate, like Bush or maybe even Trump, is a good example. And then I'll make my notes and call a friend of mine, and I'll comment. And he said, well, how do you know that? Well, where was that? And so I think you get distracted by the television camera going all over the place and the, articulations of the speaker here. So I think you can be your own talking head for one day and make your own judgments on what is actually being said by doing it this way.
Agreed, Jim. There's also a meme floating around the alt-right that when Trump uses teleprompter speech, when he uses a particular tone of voice for teleprompters, that's his way of signaling to his hardcore right-wing white supremacist base that he doesn't actually believe what he's saying. He's just reading what they tell him to read for the, whatever derisive term they use for all the rest of us. Jim, thanks for the civilians. Jim, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Luke Vargas is with us. All right, let's check in with Talk Media News. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. Luke, welcome back.
Hey, Tom, glad to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. I don't have your notes here. What's going on in the world today?
Well, because we only have 8 hours of State of the Union pre-analysis to go, I will join the pile-on and just say there are a few things I'm looking at this speech, particularly because I think the domestic messaging is going to be so predictable and not tell us anything new besides the fact that we're going to get more puffery around the tax cut, because we know Vice President Mike Pence tomorrow is heading, I think, to a truck factory in West Virginia to talk about how the tax cut is helping the American economy. I'm more interested in the foreign policy side of things. I mean, there are some big matters that the president, and really only the president, has to decide on over the next few months. Much unlike, his signaling to Congress, which may have no effect, the president is going to have to decide in less than 120 days what to do about the Iranian nuclear deal. And we had Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, bringing the entire UN Security Council to lunch with President Trump yesterday. They were also shown this supposed evidence of Iran supplying missiles to rebels in Yemen. So this is an issue that President Trump himself has set in motion, and that he himself will have to decide on what to do about the Iranian nuclear deal. So any signals there about what the U.S. in particular wants to see from its allies, particularly in Europe, when it comes down to new sanctions against Iran, that's a moment of signaling that President Trump could seize on today. And then the other one, I'd say, is NAFTA. We just saw yesterday the U.S., Canada, and Mexico wrap up the 6th round of NAFTA talks. And as much as the Mexican and Canadian trade representatives tried to put on a happy face about the current status of this deal, the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer really underscored the points of division here. And we are heading towards a Mexican presidential election in July in which a man named Lopez Obrador, who is very much against ceding too much ground in these talks with the United States, is the current frontrunner, a populist candidate. And this, the fear over particularly American negotiators since the beginning of the Trump administration has been that if these talks keep getting delayed too close to the Mexican elections, that it's just going to be impossible to secure any sort of promises from the Mexican government because their own Congress is about to be renewed and there's nobody there to validate the renegotiated deal. So we are fast approaching that deadline with very little consensus. And I think we've seen Trump say he wants a deal. We then had him come out at Davos last week to CNBC and said, I could tear up a deal. I may terminate it. Some signaling there, I think, has the potential to move markets and will be closely watched by our colleagues in our trade partners in Mexico and Canada.
Yeah. Is Obrador a progressive populist or a conservative populist?
He's left wing. I don't know much about. It's very likely. I'm just going to guess here that the sort of terms that we use to characterize folks like that probably don't fully explain his political positions. But I mean, suffice to say, we know the election, unlike the U.S., where it's sort of a rolling process where elections start up many years in advance. The official sort of campaigning period for the Mexican election start on April 1st. And, Lighthizer came out yesterday and said basically the Canadians are being hostile. They're proposing all these ridiculous amendments, and that if the U.S. were doing that, everyone would consider them to be acting in bad faith and injecting poison pills into the dialogue. And you actually had the Canadian representative come out after and say, look, these things always get dramatic, but there really was the tension between these countries is palpable now, and they've only completed work on one of the many, many chapters of this NAFTA renegotiation, and we haven't even gotten to the sticky parts yet. So I think that's an area where a little presidential guidance can be useful. Yeah. And finally, bigger things, the NATO, future of the NATO alliance, Syria, what is the U.S. plan there? What's our strategy in Afghanistan? We've heard, there was just a huge press mission to Afghanistan that I didn't go on, but many of my colleagues in the world of diplomatic reporting went to Afghanistan, and they heard several days of presentations by American diplomats in Afghanistan who praised the fact that the White House was open to talks with the Taliban, that maybe this was a political opening for this long U.S. mission there that could be really useful. Then President Trump comes out and says, absolutely no way are we going to talk with the Taliban. So there's a moment here tonight for maybe a little bit of clarity coming from the White House on some of these foreign policy issues.
Did you get the SIGAR quarterly report to Congress that came out today?
I did. I haven't had a chance to look through it. They have been some of the most recurringly depressing releases that I receive. This is the Special Investigator General for Afghanistan Reconstruction,
that's right.
who has documented many billions of dollars of waste and other sorts of American misadventure in Afghanistan. And the latest release came out today, I understand.
I'm just astonished that the Trump administration is even allowing them to tell us this stuff. It's just the amount of ordnance we dropped, the number of civilians we killed. Sure. This, despite Afghanistan's large and well-documented resources, mining revenues in 2016 supplied only 0.3% of the country's $6.5 million national budget. The meager results of a nearly $500 million U.S. investment in developing Afghan minerals should suggest to American officials that future efforts should be accompanied by polite skepticism, caution, risk management, and vigilance for unintended consequences. We've spent $500 million in Afghanistan trying to mine minerals. I didn't know that.
Well, we couldn't take their oil, so we've got to take something.
Yeah, they don't have any oil, but they've got minerals. But we're trying to take their minerals, and it's not working. It's amazing. And then, the opium poppy, despite $8.7 billion American taxpayer dollars spent on counter-narcotic efforts, opium production is up 87% from the previous year. The area under cultivation, the size of Rhode Island. Amazing. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics,
This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number two, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, "There's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more." The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm of the Presidency.
Basically calling hours of human bite.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Interesting. The video broadcast of congressional proceedings. This is from the Congressional Research Service. The House and Senate continue to, and a tip of the hat to Kathy, who sent this to me. The House and Senate continue to maintain exclusive control over their video and audio feeds, whether they are broadcast on television, radio, or over the internet. Yet technology now exists enabling anyone with a smartphone to produce and broadcast online video. This creates a greater potential for unauthorized videos to be broadcast from the House and Senate chambers. So essentially what this comes down to, video and audio feeds are operated by the House and Senate and provided to credentialed media exclusively. So we have a State of the Union address tonight where everybody who is going to be in the picture, or pretty much everybody unless they shoot the galleries, take pictures of the galleries. Everybody is a federal employee, and it's in the U.S. Capitol, which is owned by the federal government. And the Hatch Act says that federal employees may not use federal property to promote private interests, or for that matter, to even ask private, for private money for campaigns and things. This is why members of Congress leave their offices and rent offices in Washington, D.C. There's a little mini industry around Congress of places that just rent little rooms to members of Congress who go there and just sit there for 4 or 5 hours a day dialing for dollars, calling their campaign donors. You can't do it from your congressional office. And Donald Trump, as I read that letter from Eric Trump at the opening of the show to Fred Flintstone saying, hey, you give us money, even $1 tonight, and your name will be at the bottom of the crawl that we're feeding. The feed itself is the property of the federal government. And the Trump campaign is giving that away. This is bizarre stuff. Okay, that's number one. There's a couple things I wanted to rant about, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. That was number one. The second was, and I touched on this somewhat in my conversation with Luke Vargas with Talk Media News just a minute ago, but this report, every 4 times a year, the the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, SIGAR, publishes a quarterly report, and they send it out to the media. And so I'm being part of the media. I get a copy of it. And there's some just breathtaking things in here. First of all, I'm quoting, this came from a military email address, right? From, at mail.mil. This is the real thing. This is the actual report from Afghanistan of what's going on, or from, about what's going on in Afghanistan. This quarter, quote, this quarter, Department of Defense instructed SIGAR not to, the special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, not to release the public data on the number of districts and the population living in them controlled or influenced by the Afghan government or by the insurgents or contested by both. This is the first time SIGAR has been specifically instructed not to release information marked unclassified to the American taxpayer. So what's Trump up to here in Afghanistan? Is he running around saying, yeah, we're winning the war, but actually we're losing the war? And so they're just going to shut down the information? I'm really impressed that, that the U.S. military is telling the press, me, in no uncertain terms, this is the first time we have been specifically instructed not to release information marked unclassified to the American taxpayer. That's breathtaking. And why would they no longer want us to know how many regions of Afghanistan are controlled by us versus the Taliban? Or, arguably the Afghan government versus the Taliban. Number one. Number two, the quarter's essay warns against unrealistic expectations for mineral development. Now, you'll remember Donald Trump, when he was campaigning, he said, there's $1 trillion worth of minerals in Afghanistan. Why aren't we taking them? Well, apparently we tried to. Back to the report. The meager results of a nearly $500 million U.S. investment in developing Afghan minerals should suggest to American officials that future efforts should be accompanied by polite skepticism, caution, risk management, and vigilance for unintended consequences. Despite Afghanistan's large and well-documented resources, mining revenues in 2016 supplied only 0.3% of the country's national budget. Among other obstacles, plans to develop the country's mineral resources have been stymied by insecurity, corruption, weak governance, and a lack of infrastructure. So let me get this straight. George W. Bush decided to bomb back to the Stone Age, a country that was already in the Stone Age. Afghanistan was the second poorest country on earth. It had a $2 billion a year GDP, the gross domestic product, $2 billion a year. I mean, that's the second lowest on earth on a per capita basis. And $2 billion a year, and this is the size of this country, right? $2 billion a year is less than the size of most state budgets in the United States. And we went in and just bombed the bejesus out of them and then occupied them for, what has it been, 15 years now, something like that? 16 years? Thank you, Sean. 16 years we've been sitting in Afghanistan and we continue to bomb the crap out of these people. And we wonder why they don't love us. Back to the report. There has been a significant uptick in U.S. airstrikes and special operations, with the U.S. dropping 653 munitions in October 2017. While this is a record high since 2012 and a more than threefold increase from October 2016, these actions have yet to increase the Afghan government's control over its population. So here is the Department of Defense telling us right up front, we're bombing the crap out of them and it's not doing any good. RS reported, again, quoting from the report, this is from the Department of Defense, RS reported 4,474 civilian casualties from June 1st to November 27, 2017, a 13% increase compared to the same period last year. We have killed more civilians in Afghanistan in the last year, during the first year of the Trump administration. We killed more civilians in Afghanistan than Osama bin Laden killed in the United States. And we've been doing it for 16 years. They go on to say, from January 1st to November 26, 2017, 11 U.S. military personnel were killed in Afghanistan and 99 were wounded. This is double the personnel killed in action compared to the same periods in 2015 and 2016. And then on top of this, despite $8.7 billion in American taxpayer dollars, $8 billion spent on counter-narcotics efforts in Afghanistan. Now, wait a minute. Why aren't we spending $8 billion in the United States to help people addicted to opiates? Oh, that's right. The companies that sell those drugs are huge campaign donors to the Republican Party, aren't they? And a few Democrats, too. Okay, despite $8.7 billion American taxpayer dollars spent on counter-narcotic efforts in Afghanistan, opium production and total area under opium cultivation have reached an all-time high, up 87% and 63% respectively from the previous year. The total area under opium cultivation in Afghanistan approaches the area of Rhode Island. This document, this quarterly report from SIGAR, from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, this is like the Pentagon Papers. This is like what Daniel Ellsberg back in the day told us about how Vietnam was going to hell in a handbasket. We were not, achieving our goals. We were killing more and more civilians. It wasn't working. It's the same thing in Afghanistan. And so what does the Trump administration tell the Special Inspector General to do? Don't tell the American public, even though it's not classified information, don't tell the American public how much of Afghanistan is controlled by the Taliban relative to last year. Trump is failing in Afghanistan, and he doesn't want you to know. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I got to tell you about what Amazon, Berkshire, and J.P. Morgan are up to after this. Stick around. Welcome back. Sharif in Independence, Missouri. Hey, Sharif, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. I hope you are too.
I am well. I'm going to try to be really brief here. So I have kids of different ages. I have one son who grew up in the 90s, and I have some younger children that are coming up now. So 2015, this guy comes down an escalator, and my 90s child was, oh yeah, he's gonna be great. He's gonna do this. He's gonna do that.
Oh, this is a kid who grew up watching Celebrity Apprentice, right?
He doesn't. He's a talk show kid. Mm-hmm. He listens to. But I didn't come to find out what he was listening to until the debate came between us and this man coming down the escalator. So InfoWars, Fox News, so I'm like, oh, hey, wait a minute. You grew up in this house with me. What's going on here? So you really, really have to pay attention to what your kids are listening to and where they're getting their news. So my younger son says to me one day, I've never seen you watch the news or listen to talk radio like you do. I watch you in the house and I listen to you in the car. And he's like, why are you so fixated on this? And I told him, I said, well, my antennas went up when I heard Russia, because I grew up in a time where you do fire drills. I used to do drills for nuclear,
Yeah, we did duck and cover in the 50s. I remember it well.
Exactly. So we were running out into the hallway and, not that it was going to save us. Put your hand over your head and get in a fetal position because, they're about to drop a bomb.
Right.
And so then the 90s come about, 70s, 80s, 90s. So and that comes about. And so, that's all over. Things have been calmed down. But I heard this word, and it sparked my attention. And I'm like, okay, well, this is familiar. I'm going back to my childhood. And for the 90s son, he's not really present, let's just say. And so I said, okay, how am I going to get him to see what I'm talking about? And so instead of having division within the house, because I was about to not allow him back in my house there for a while. And I said, okay, well, how about you listen to what
Sheriff, we just have 10 seconds left.
And I'll listen to what you listen to. But what I'm trying to say is we have to put both points of view out there for our kids, because these are dangerous times.
Yeah, I agree. And it sounds like, you're trying to raise your kids to be critical thinkers, and one kind of slipped by. There's serious propaganda out there, Fox so-called news and right-wing hate radio in particular. Sheriff, thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, 3 corporate giants. This from CNBC. No, this is Bloomberg. Excuse me. 3 corporate giants are teaming up to combat what billionaire Warren Buffett calls a hungry tapeworm feasting on the U.S. healthcare system. This is fascinating. Zachary Tracer and Hugh Sun writing for Bloomberg News, Bloomberg.com. Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and J.P. Morgan Chase. This would be Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, and Jamie Dimon are pulling together a new independent company, quote, that is free from profit-making incentives and constraints. Now, that is single-payer healthcare. Now, it's not truly single-payer because it's only going to apply to 3 companies. Arguably, well, I got to stop saying arguably so much. You could say that it's just single-payer healthcare, or excuse me, it's just in-company healthcare, and they're running it not to make a profit because they're really just trying to provide a benefit to their employees. But if this works for these 3 very large companies, I'm not sure how big Berkshire Hathaway is, although Berkshire Hathaway owns a bunch of companies. So if they're going to extend it to all the companies that they've invested in, this could be huge. This could take down the for-profit healthcare model that has controlled the United States since World War II. Or really since the Reagan administration. I mean, when I grew up in Lansing, Michigan back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, all the hospitals were not-for-profit. The health insurance companies were required to be not-for-profit. I believe the hospitals were required to be not-for-profit because they all were. They were either run by Catholic Charities, or they were run by the county, or they were run by, it was the city. So if this works, and Jamie Dimon said, quote, our goal is to create solutions that benefit our U.S. employees, their families, and potentially all Americans. And he was responding to something Warren Buffett said. He said Warren Buffett said the ballooning costs of healthcare act as a hungry tapeworm on the American economy. They have appointed this guy, Todd Combs, who works for Berkshire Hathaway. He started out as a stock picker, then he became a major player in the company. He's in his 40s. And he's going to put this thing together. And I believe that's entirely possible. This might be proof of concept for single payer. And wouldn't that be a cool thing? So we'll see what happens. And finally, before Trump goes on TV tonight, if you intend to watch it, I know a lot of people are boycotting it. I don't have the luxury of doing that. I have to be able to talk about it tomorrow. But, and apropos of that, earlier in the program, I said Joe Kennedy III is not a member of the Progressive Caucus. I was wrong. He does oppose marijuana legalization and has voted against medical marijuana, as far as I can tell. But outside of that, he is a member of the Progressive Caucus, and he's a pretty progressive guy. So You know, I think he's wrong on pot, but, you know, Progressive Caucus, good guy, good positions, broadly speaking. So I'm also looking forward to watching Joe Kennedy's State of the Union. And then there's 3 other ones that are going to be given. But just so that you're ready for when Trump starts bragging about, we're bringing the jobs back home. This from Public Citizen, from Lori Wallach. Job outsourcing continues with hundreds of the very Carrier workers that Trump, Carrier Corporation, the air conditioning manufacturer, with hundreds of very Carrier workers Trump pledged to protect, seeing their jobs shipped to Mexico, along with 300 jobs across Indianapolis at Rexnord and another 600 in Nabisco and Chicago. 300 Milwaukee GE workers saw their jobs shipped to Canada this fall, while Microsoft is outsourcing jobs to China and Lowe's is outsourcing jobs to India. In fact, the recent tax bill, this from Public Citizen, the recent tax bill is projected to incentivize corporations to outsource even more U.S. jobs by offering lower tax rates to firms operating offshore while failing to eliminate longstanding pro-outsourcing loopholes. NAFTA and the China trade deficits are up in Trump's first year in office. No action was taken to slow the flood of imports from China or to boost U.S. exports there in all of 2017. The entire first year of Trump's presidency, he did nothing. Alarmingly, Trump's 2017 China state visit featured Goldman Sachs announcing a $5 billion joint investment fund with the Chinese government's main investment arm, Chinese Investment Corporation, to acquire more U.S. assets. Right, the communist government of China is going to buy more and more of the United States. And Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross touted an array of other pledges by Chinese state-owned and state-linked companies to acquire additional assets in sensitive American sectors, including infrastructure, energy, and food. Right. So much for Trump promising to go tough on China. Instead, they are handing our technology, our secrets, and our economy over to the Chinese, and doing it enthusiastically, apparently, while Trump will go on TV tonight. I predict, and I think I can predict safely, he's going to go on TV tonight and he's going to say, oh, yeah, we're bringing the jobs back home. Everything's great. You know, Robert Lighthizer, this is the one area where I've been saying this for 2 years. You've been hearing this on this program, where a broken clock is right twice a day. Donald Trump is right on trade. But he's not doing it. Robert Lighthizer is a good guy. He's in the Trump White House, in my opinion. He's a good guy when it comes to trade. And we do need to return to a mercantilist trade policy, in my opinion. The deficit that we have, the trade deficit that we have with China and many other countries, is killing us. And it's because all these countries went, when we all abandoned tariffs, all these countries went to a VAT tax, a value-added tax, in order to function as a tariff. And you've heard my rant on that many times, so I won't, recap it all now, but just suffice it to say, we got to fix this. Anyhow, it's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back right after the news or whatever it may be at the bottom of the hour, and we'll be picking up your phone calls after that. Stick around. A fascinating day in... Is it Donald Trump's America yet? I still don't think so.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
After all, he had lost the election by 3 million votes. We'll be back.
We're reading today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. This is chapter 3, page 53. It's titled Population. Sometime between mid-2007 and mid-2008, China exceeded the United States as the single largest emitter of carbon dioxide, dumping an estimated 7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year in 2008, compared with the U.S. estimated 6.2 billion tons that year.
But China is a vast and populous country. On a per-person basis, Americans are still the most profligate producers of carbon dioxide, with the average American in 2008 directly responsible for around 19.4 tons of greenhouse gas, not to mention the portion of China's emissions that went to make products shipped to and consumed by Americans. Russia, with its less than modern industrial infrastructure, comes in second at around 11.8 tons per person. It's a cold country, and few homes are truly winterized. Then the European Union at 8.6 tons per person, and China at 5.1 tons per person. India, which is rapidly industrializing, is still one of the most efficient per-person nations in the world at 1.8 tons of CO2 per person per year. Although that's because much of the country is so poor they don't have cars, the winters don't require much heat except in the extreme north, and the focus of India's industrialization has been digital rather than manufacturing. The largest driver of all these processes that are tearing our planet apart and putting all life at risk is the increase in human biomass. There are roughly 1 trillion pounds of human flesh on the planet right now, and assuming a worldwide average food consumption of around 3 pounds per person, in the U.S. it's almost 5 per day, we're consuming around 7 trillion pounds of food per year. One result of this is that over half of the entire net productive capacity of the planet, the entire planet's ability to produce edible products from photosynthesis, is now used up, displaced, or wiped out by humans, leaving every other life form on Earth to compete for the leftovers. Our population growth has not been particularly even. In the first 100,000 years of human history, we averaged around 20 to 50 million people total. 60,000 or so years ago, as we moved out of Africa and began to cover the world, we crept up to a few hundred million by the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago. Around the time of the Crusades, when the world was, by most definitions, pretty well populated, we were coming into conflict with each other all over the world. There were only 500 million of us on the entire planet. Not long after the American Revolution, we hit our first billion humans on planet Earth in 1800. The second billion didn't take 165,000 years. We doubled our population in just 130 years, hitting 2 billion in 1930, just as the United States was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. But that economic debacle didn't slow the growth of human numbers. By the year JFK was sworn in, just 30 years later, the planet had added another billion humans. The growth in population was driven largely by cheap, abundant oil and fertilizer and pesticides made from it, the farm and transportation equipment fueled by it, and the processing, packaging, and distribution system made possible by oil that lets a person in Iowa have a lunch of tilapia fish grown in ponds in China, lettuce and tomatoes grown in Mexico, wine imported from France, and a fruit cup of berries imported from Chile and strawberries from Nicaragua. In this environment of relatively abundant food, even in the third world, our fourth billion took us only 14 years to add, 1974. Our fifth billion only 13 years, 1987. And our sixth billion only 12 years, 1999. As oil became more expensive, raising the price of food indirectly, since most of us are actually eating oil, population growth first began to slow in the first decade of the 21st century. Part of this was attributable to birth rate declines in developed countries, part to an explosion in the death rates because of TB and AIDS in the third world, part to famine and associated diseases in sub-Saharan Africa as deserts moved south due to global warming. But while growth is slowing, we're still adding people at a rate many times faster than just 3 centuries ago. Topsoil all over the world is vanishing. Transportation is becoming exponentially more expensive. And as human population density increasingly resembles the inside of a petri dish, diseases ranging from TB, more than 1 billion people are infected, and more die from that than any other cause worldwide, to AIDS, to the constantly mutating common cold and related corona and flu viruses, remember SARS, represent a menace that is dramatically amplified by the 1 trillion pounds of human flesh such diseases inhabit. We are not the first culture to reach this threshold of population versus resources. As I discussed at length later in this book, the Maori of New Zealand, a group of Polynesian explorers, are a prime example of a culture that, like the Europeans who discovered America, thought they had found a land of unlimited wealth and food, but ultimately learned that there is a limit to growth, the biosphere, and that when you unthinkingly hit that limit, life can become hellish and democracy nearly impossible. But the concept of a limit to growth, or a finite world, was largely unknown to the classical economists on whose assumptions, formulas, and work our modern economy is organized. In fact, the classical and neoclassical economists, from Malthus to Jean-Baptiste Say to Marx to Friedman, would suggest that the Maori hit the limit not of their biosphere, the ability of the land of New Zealand to produce food, but of their technology. They would correctly point out that today New Zealand houses several million more people than it did when that island nation was entirely populated by Maori. And modern technology has ensured that not only is there enough food, but that surplus agricultural land has been turned to a growing of fuel and medicinal crops. The book is Threshold.
They're commercial free, and you can listen.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dwight in Minneapolis. Hey, Dwight, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom. I have a question and a statement. And it's regarding the White House investigation. I'm wondering if Rod Rosenstein is dismissed from office, what happens to the investigation? And if the investigation is shut down, this is a slow roll to fascism. That's my statement.
Yeah, what we have right now, frankly, I'm concerned more. I don't think that Trump can stop the investigation right now, even if he fires Rosenstein or forces him to quit. But the thing that flips me out even more is the fact that he is purging the FBI. When you see a head of state purging their major police agency, you know that something really bad is going on. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens in banana republics. This is third world, autocratic stuff. This is not small d democracy. This is not how it should be. This is something that should really concern all of us. So, but in terms of Rosenstein, we'll have to see. Dwight, thanks for the call. Well said. Scott in Houston, Texas. Hey, Scott. It says here you disagree with me. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Actually, I agree with you 100% on marijuana, but I think it ends right there. But
okay,
I keep hearing, tax the rich, pay the fair share. There's one frustrating thing. It's not only you, but it's all the liberal talking heads. And again, I'm not a conservative. I'm a libertarian, and I did not vote for Trump. But I've never heard a definition of what rich is. And I've never heard a definition of what fair share is.
I'll give it to you if you'd like.
Absolutely.
Sure. If you look at the U.S. tax code from the 1930s until
I'd rather not.
Well, yeah, that's
but
cute, Scott. If you look at the U.S. tax code from the 1930s to the 1980s and you inflation adjust it to today's dollars, what you find is that people kicked into an above 50% tax bracket when they made the equivalent of around $3 million a year in today's money. And under $3 million a year, they were paying less, at the federal level. And state taxes during that period in time were much, broadly speaking, much lower than they are now. So probably 45% would do it. And that's a pretty magical number, because what you find if you look at countries around the world, developed countries around the world, that when the individual tax rate on income over $3 million a year kicks above 50%, you have wildly less inequality in your society, and you have a much more stable economy. The economy tends not to go through wild swings of boom and bust, and you have a higher rate of education, more successful people. Populace, you have, and then all the things that are associated with inequality, from teenage pregnancies to venereal diseases to suicide to mental illness to violence in society, all those negative indicators, and there's about 25 of them that Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett documented in their books, Why Inequality Matters and the Spirit Level. And you can find, and they've got a giant website that details this country by country by country, and then they do every state in the United States and compare state by state by state. And what you find is that the lower the inequality is, that is, the less rich the richest person is, and the less poor the poorest person is, the more equal people are, the lower the rate of all these negative outcomes, and the greater the level of inequality, the higher the rate of all these negative outcomes. And it's literally a mathematically definable relationship. So if you want your country to work, you want your society to work, you want your people not to end up opiate addicts and with STDs,
Tom,
then,
that's a stretch, man. I mean,
it's real. It's absolutely real, Scott. It's absolutely real.
The problem I have with
and let me just finish here, Scott, for just a second. And the tax and the typical response from libertarians and conservatives is, oh my God, well, if you raise taxes like that, you know, eventually it's going to hit the little guy, and when it does, the little guy's not going to be able to work. And
it does.
Yeah, of course it does, and it should. And so if you look at Denmark right now, the minimum wage in Denmark, the amount that McDonald's workers in Denmark make is between $17 and $19 an hour equivalent. Now, why is that? Because they're paying 30% tax rates, income tax rates, 30 to 45% income tax rates, even at that level. For that, they get not just free college, but they pay you $200 a month to go to college, and they provide housing for you. You get free health care, completely. No deductibles, no exceptions, nothing. Nobody in Denmark since World War II has declared bankruptcy because of health expenses. In the United States, there was a report this morning that showed that more than 50% of all the GoFundMe sites are because people got wiped out by healthcare expenses. Right now, more than half of all bankruptcies in the United States are because somebody got sick. In Denmark, the number of people who go bankrupt because somebody got sick is zero. Zero. So what happens is working people who are making enough that people who are making so little that they basically spend all of their income, which is, in the United States, typically people making less than $50,000 a year. Working people are paid based on their take-home pay, not their gross salary. So the McDonald's worker in Denmark, at the end of the day, when they look at what they've got left over after taxes, it's only just slightly more than a McDonald's worker in the United States. It's about $2 or $3 an hour more than in the United States, because they have a higher minimum wage, because of the taxes. So what happens is when you raise taxes on working people, their pay goes up. When you lower taxes on working people, their pay goes down, because their employers know that they've got more in their paycheck from the lower taxes, and they also know that the people are willing to work for less. And so they drop their wages. And that's why wages have gone down in the United States since Reagan, and they've gone up in high-tax countries like Canada. And on the other hand, if you look at how taxes affect the rich, when the Koch brothers have a tax decrease, they get they're getting probably $1 billion this year that they can just stick in a Swiss bank account. I mean, or they can use it to buy politicians. But it doesn't help the economy. Whereas, if their taxes go up, that's money that we can use to build a society that works for all of us, where everybody can go to college, everybody can have health care, everybody can have a decent life. Your rebuttal, Mr. Libertarian.
First of all, we're not Denmark, and we actually have a military, which Denmark does not have.
Denmark does have a military. In fact, Denmark is a member of NATO, and they joined us in invading Afghanistan and Iraq.
Tom, let me bottom line it for you, and here's where I have a huge issue with giving that amount of trust and that amount of money to the government.
It actually worked here for 45 years, Scott.
I let you ramble for a long time, man.
Yeah, go for it.
Let me get one point.
Go for it.
One point. Okay? If I owe $100,000, and I'll make it real simple. If I owe $100,000 to the most evil corporate credit card company out there, I owe them $100,000, and I don't pay it for 5 years. And I owe that same $100,000 to the federal government, and I don't pay it for 5 years. What's going to happen to me, one versus the other? And the answer is this. The answer is the federal government could jail me at the end of the frickin' day. And that's where I have a problem, Tom. You're giving all this love and support and trust to people like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump and Conyers and all these other phony baloney and the Clintons that have scammed us for years. Tom, both sides of the aisle.
If you don't like corrupt politicians, Scott,
billion-dollar houses all over the place.
I don't like corrupt politicians either. We can clean up politics, but it has nothing to do with taxes.
If Trump does one thing and gets rid of the AMT tax, I will vote for him again.
Yeah.
Because that is
Scott, you want to live in a rich country, but you don't want to pay your fair share, right? That's the bottom line of what you're saying?
For years.
You want the bottom, Scott? The bottom line of what you're saying is you want to live in a rich country, but you don't want to pay your fair share, right? You don't want to pay for it. You don't want to pay for the roads. You don't want to pay for the septic. You don't want to pay for the education.
You know how much I pay in taxes? I make
I don't care how much you pay in taxes. You're saying that government should not be allowed to collect taxes.
I pay 67% taxes a year, Tom. 67%. How much more should I pay? I make $250,000 a year. I have 5 children. How much should I pay?
I have no idea, Scott, and I don't, and I don't, and I don't trust your numbers or your statements. We are talking about we don't have a 67% tax rate.
Why do I have to have a mathematical degree and 1,000 calculators to figure out what I pay?
You shouldn't have to, Scott. In Norway, every year, when your tax at the end of the year, the government sends you an itemized statement that says, I think you'll like this. The government sends you an itemized statement that says, out of the $1,000 that you paid in taxes this year, $122 went to education, $38 went to the military, $57 went to pay for roads. They literally itemize how your taxes were paid, and they do your taxes for you.
Tom,
we can do that easily. It's just that there's this industry of tax preparers who lobby Congress.
Tom, I would pay a 30% flat tax. No ifs, ands, or buts, no deductibles, nothing. If I knew that we could get rid of the IRS, fire all those people, and get rid of...
Then you wouldn't pay the tax.
Ultimate power. They have more power than the dang president of the United States, and it's ridiculous.
There'd be no tax if you fired the IRS.
Get rid of it, and I will take a 30% flat tax. I have no problems with that.
Yeah.
But everybody wants
and you want somebody working for $9 an hour to also pay that 30%?
I'm sorry?
You want somebody working for $9 an hour to also pay that 30%?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You just said flat tax. So you're saying that the top tax rate you're willing to pay is 30%. Good luck, Scott, finding a developed country where you would actually want to live, where somebody making $250,000 a year pays 30% or less. Good luck. Yeah, you might find that in, I don't know, maybe someplace you don't want to live. We'll leave it at that. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Donald Trump has a word for those countries, but anyhow, we'll be right back. Countries that don't work, let's say. Yeah, sure. No taxes. It's wonderful. And welcome back. Alan in Chiefland, Florida. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call, and thank you for your programming. It's great to hear truth.
Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
There is a great deal of talk about Russian interference in our election. I'd like to put this idea forward to you. Why doesn't the United States lead by example and stop interfering with the elections of other sovereign countries? I'll hang up and listen to your answer. Thank you.
You're welcome, Alan. I think that we should stop interfering in the affairs of other sovereign countries. I suspect that the Russians are sitting around going, "Hey, look what these guys did in Ukraine." We messed with Ukraine hugely. That doesn't justify Russia messing with us, but I share your opinion that we should not be doing. Or for that matter, look at what we did to Afghanistan and Iraq, two sovereign nations that we invaded. Iraq, we had no reason to invade. In Afghanistan, we only had a very, very marginal reason to invade, particularly after the I don't know what his title was, Mullah Omar, the guy who ran the Taliban, whether he was president or prime minister or whatever he was, the chief Taliban guy. He offered to arrest bin Laden and hand him over to us. Anyhow, Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind?
Good day, Tom.
Hey, Randy, let me just put you on hold here for a second. I'm sorry. I want to get you in the next block. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Sure. Thanks for taking my call and happy Tuesday. I was just going to throw out there. I don't think that everyone should boycott the State of the Union address. I think like all the Trump rally speeches and stuff like that, we can definitely boycott. But, I've watched all the State of the Union addresses, and we're actually having a small little get-together at our place with the acronym, the STFU, SOTU, for the Trump State of the Union address tonight. And we're going to listen, with not much deference, but as to what the president has to say to us. But it's it's definitely something that, even though we don't want to sit there and listen to, it's probably one of those things that we should, just to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, well, like I said, I have no choice. I have to watch it. Otherwise, I'd probably wait and read the online transcript. So anyhow, Marty, thanks for the call. Reginald in Houston, Texas, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Reginald.
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call, man. You talk about Afghan and what we did in Iraq, and I remember some people say it was a conspiracy theory that 19 of those the people that was on the plane that did 9/11 were actually Saudis. And I know Michael Moore did a book on Fahrenheit 9/11. When, this was done on the Republicans, and when the Democrats got control of the House, they told us in 2006 they was going to investigate this here, and they didn't, and Nancy Pelosi took it off the table. When Barack Obama got in office, I thought he was going to investigate why we went into Iraq and why we went into Afghanistan and investigate the Bush administration on this genocide, and it's a travesty that we did. Then he went and did attack Libya and then Yemen, and maybe did Trump escalated this thing. So I'm trying to figure out where's the hope that we can have, because I didn't go Republican and I'm upset with it.
We've got to take back our government, Reginald. We've got to take back our government. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good day.
Good day.
The guy that said that he made $250,000 a year and was paying, what did he say, 67% taxes?
Yeah, I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Well, that'd leave him 32% at $250,000. It might cramp his style a little bit, but I have a hard time believing it myself. But the point that really got to me, that irritated me, is, and I watched C-SPAN this morning, and I cannot believe how many climate deniers and all this stuff with no ideas to actual what's going on, the workings of government and how things work, that hate government. And this guy wants to get rid of the IRS because his taxes are too high. Why? The government works. It doesn't work for the people anymore because people like that end up in government. And the problem is that he spends how much of his tax dollars, and approximately how much his tax dollars goes to corporations. I mean, only 4% goes to social services. It's a minuscule amount, the people in the IRS. So the checks and balances are almost gone or ineffective, and all of his money's going for corporate welfare and tax cuts for people that are just a little bit richer than him. So I think I made my point. There are so many misguided and uninformed people who don't see the big picture, that good government is good, and people who hate government build government that doesn't work. And I'm just sorry. I was going to hold off and not call you right away, but that guy really got the best of me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. And the Dow is down again. It's down 1.4%. The NASDAQ is down 1%. S&P is down 1%. And it looks like increasingly this is the result of the Republican tax scam, that our federal government is borrowing $1.5 trillion to give that money to the Koch brothers and their friends. And surprise, surprise, nobody wants to buy our bonds right now. And it's freaking out the bond market, which is now starting to freak out the stock market. And Trump is going to go on TV tonight and brag about all this stuff.
Right.
And
I anticipate a fallback, a Wall Street fallback.
Oh, of course.
I mean, you can't inflate it that much and blow so much smoke into the market without having a fallback.
Oh, and the PE ratio, the price to earnings ratio of most of these big companies that are being traded on the Dow and the NASDAQ are almost twice what they typically are. I mean, it's striking.
Way out of control.
Yeah, it really is, and there's got to be a reckoning, a correction. Randy, thank you for the call. Good to hear from you. Will actually, hang on just a second, Will. Let me just do a rant. Randy just reminded me of something that I wanted to mention. I've told this story many times. I was watching Bloomberg News, and they were interviewing. It was an American journalist living in Singapore interviewing a German businessman in Singapore, and a very wealthy German businessman. And he said, the American journalist said, "I understand in Germany you're paying more than 50% in taxes." And the guy said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's terrible." And the guy said, "I don't have a problem with it." And they moved on, and then he came back and he says, a little later on, he said, "But what about that 50% in taxes? I don't get." And the guy said, "I don't have a problem with it." Third time, this is like 7 minutes into the interview, the third time the American comes back, the reporter comes back and says, "I just don't understand how you can put up with paying that high a tax." And the guy just, in a very simple and direct fashion says, "I have no interest. I do not want to be a rich man in a poor country." Boom. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I think basically, what our libertarian caller was saying is he's just fine being a rich man in a poor country. Will in San Francisco. Hey, Will, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to comment on the cost of healthcare. So I do accounting books for a medium-sized business, and a traditional PPO plan, this is what it costs. A traditional PPO plan for a family is for just the premiums, all right? So you're just buying access to health insurance, right, to health care. It costs $20,000 for the employer, and on top of that, it's $13,000 for the employee.
Per year.
Per year. And that, again, that's just access to a doctor. So, I just want to give people a little bit of perspective. Like, that's the reality of what we're, as an employer, is paying, which is absurd.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing to me, Will, that, I'm an employer. I have been almost all my entire life, or adult life, certainly. And when I went on Medicare, suddenly the amount of money that I'm spending on health insurance dropped by almost half. And if we could just extend Medicare to everybody in the United States, I mean, it'd just be incredible. Will, thanks for the call, and thanks for pointing this out. Mary in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Am I saying your name right?
It's Marie.
Murray. I'm sorry. What's up?
That's okay. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a veteran and I'm a nurse, and I'm really concerned about what's going on with the Republicans. I don't know if Mueller can investigate them or
I think he is.
Is he?
I think so. I think that this I don't know what you call it, this scam that the Trump family has been running is now being facilitated by Devin Nunes and all these other guys. And if Mueller isn't looking into it, he's missing the boat.
Well, that makes me feel good, because what I think is the Republicans, they're just, I call them Trump-publicans, because they've already meshed with him. It's almost incestuous. They have decided the country is not their priority, and they have corporate-rated America.
Yep. Yeah, and this the GOP tax scam is the most visible example of that. I mean, they just borrowed $1.5 trillion on the U.S. Treasury, and in order to borrow that money, they had to issue bonds. They're starting to issue the bonds now, and the bond market is saying, "No, we don't want them." Major bond crisis because of the Republican tax scam. I'm guessing we're not going to hear anything about that tonight in the State of the Union address. Marie, thank you so much for the call. Thanks so much for being with us today. It's a fascinating day. It's going to be a fascinating evening. There are 5 Democratic rebuttals to the President's State of the Union. Progressive Caucus member Joe Kennedy III giving one of them, the main one, and several others. Check it out. It's going to be a big night. And don't forget, democracy requires you. Tag you're it. Get out there, get active, tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets. and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com.